watch any of these videos before I react to them. I want to give my organic reaction to what these people are saying. But here's another StyxHexenhammer video that I saw that I really wanted to respond to, because the title of the video is All Authoritarian Systems Are Inherently Leftist. I don't know what he means by that. And I'm kind of curious, because there have been a lot, in fact, the majority of authoritarian systems have been very conservative and right-wing. There have been a couple that were leftist, such as the USSR and Mao's China, but that's only their economic model. But there's been quite a number more of conservative and right-wing authoritarian systems, like the one we have right now. We currently have an authoritarian fascist in office who's very right-wing. But let's see what this guy has to say.
It's time for a little bit more of a philosophical political video here. It's based on a tweet that I made the other day in a moment of clarity, actually, that it seems to have hit a nerve with people who have Karl Marx avatars, as well as people that are named like Odin Stormhammer 1488 and stuff like that.
That's oddly specific. You don't want to know what he has to say? Well, I have to know what he has to say. I'm incredibly curious, but we're going to turn this guy up again so that I don't have to hear his voice as much. Is there a speed between 1.75? We'll go 1.75 so that this, because it's a 14-minute video. But that was an oddly specific username that you called out. Did you get into an argument with somebody called, what did you say?
1488 and stuff like that. They seem incensed. Stormhammer 1488 and stuff like that.
Odin
They seem incensed
Stormhammer
by the fact that I pointed out that
1488?
all authoritarian systems, I know my horseshoe theory, and you can post your smuggies and stuff, but the idea is authoritarian systems.
That's the best part of the video, the kitty running by. Best part of the video, calling it now.
By definition, in their authoritarianism, are left-leaning. There is no such thing as right-wing authoritarianism.
Yes, there is. Yes, there fucking is. Hitler, for one, Saddam Hussein, for two, Kim Jong-un, the Kim family in North Korea, very conservative. And there are more, but those are just the ones that I can come up with off the top of my head. In fact, the majority of them, as far as my memory serves, have been right-wing, not lefty. Even like in the USSR, their social politics could be considered very conservative, even if they did have a state socialist economic system. But even over in Russia, being gay is outlawed. Like Putin even says that, who's very authoritarian. Putin has openly said that there are no gay people in Russia, and being gay in Russia is criminalized. You see very similar frames of mind socially in China, outside of Hong Kong. Same with North Korea. Same with many countries where they have authoritarian regimes, or what's the model where the church runs it? It's on the tip of my tongue, but the word is escaping me. But those are very right wing, and they're also very authoritarian. Just because somebody has an economic model that may be left leaning, or a leftist economic model like socialism or communism, doesn't mean that it is a leftist regime. And the majority of or all of the countries that have implemented communism or socialism, with the exception of Venezuela, before the U.S. embargoes that destroyed their economy and led to the situation that we're seeing now, also the same with Cuba, they didn't have actual communism. Even Vietnam, actual communism is a classless, stateless society. You can't have authoritarianism if there is no state, if there is not somebody with a monopoly on violence. So when people say, and I know it's a meme, that communism has never truly been tried, they're being legitimate. True communism, actual communism, has never been actually tried because in every single situation, there's still been a state. There's still been a class system. Even if the economic model is vaguely socialist or vaguely communist, it wasn't true communism, not true socialism, because there was still social classes and there was still a very strong state. And in almost in every single instance that has been implemented so far, it's been state communism or state socialism or even state capitalism that they try to refer to as communism because they don't like it. Socialism in and of itself is the means of production being owned by the workers, not the state. But anyway, I'm going to let him keep going.
If you have a system which is fundamentally economically laissez-faire, it's privatized.
It's laissez-faire, but whatever.
Private property actually exists. It's not going to be a fully authoritarian system. That situation, the authoritarianism that would exist would not be on the front end of production. It would be on the end of actual buying things with the production that you've done. So you'd make your money, but you'd be limited maybe in what you can do with it.
There's more to being a leftist than just an economic model. Even if somebody has a laissez-faire capitalist system, there can still be an authoritarian government that still has a monopoly on violence, like we see in the United States.
What you can say, and you can coordinate your communication with it. It's funny to see communists say, well, we're not opposed to personal property like computers and cars and stuff. We'll need private property, something that has to do with production.
True. That is very true.
I think you'll find that automobiles and computers both fall therefore under private property.
A personally owned vehicle and a personally owned automobile wouldn't. Now, if it's owned by a company or a corporation or used for production, then yes, it would fall under private property, which should be abolished. But personal property, my personal computer and my personal vehicle wouldn't.
Of course, if you're saying that you have the right to redistribute the means of production in a more fair capacity, as you would say, that would indicate the cars would definitely have to be on that list. Yeah, your work truck gets confiscated, replaced with a 70-year-old Volkswagen Beetle. Good luck getting to work in the wintertime.
That's not what that means. It means that the work truck owned by the company would be owned by the workers rather than by a capitalist or by the state. It has nothing to do with your own personal vehicle. And besides, Volkswagen Bugs are front-wheel drive. They'll do just fine in the snow.
It's okay to be starving anyway, so work be damned. Authoritarian systems, though, if you have an authoritarian government, or I shouldn't say government, I should say an authoritarian structure, because you can have a theocracy in which you just got some priestly class making all...
Theocracy, that's the word I was thinking of. Thank you, StyxHexenhammer, for reminding me of the word.
Decisions. You can have essentially a non-government run by a single barbarian tyrant who rules by military force, and beyond that there could be no further organization, no legislative system, parliament, anything we would recognize as a modern government. You could have an oligarchic system, sort of like a technocratic council or anything. You have a robot run your country. Technically speaking, a bunch of computers could do the job. They probably do it better than many politicians, I hate to say, it's very sad.
None of those things that you just listed that you are personally admitting would be authoritarian are leftist. Leftism refers to economic models. But those aren't leftist government models that you just proposed, dude. Oh.
Inherently be far left. And I'll tell you why. And authoritarianism exists on a gradient.
Why?
I'm not saying, well, some of these people are saying that I was conflating different forms of government with communism. Communism is just one authoritarian type of government. And it is inevitably authoritarian. When people say they're libertarian...
Communism isn't a type of government, it's an economic model.
And socialists, they have flown the coop.
It does take government regulation to enforce, I suppose, until you can get to a truly classless, stateless society. But to get to that point would require a state enforcing such said model, but that doesn't necessitate its existence as being authoritarian.
They're just mashing words together to make it sound more palatable. It's sort of like democratic socialism. Well, Venezuela is a democratic socialist nation. Maduro was duly elected, but they don't want you to understand that. The reason why it will...
Yes, but there are many socialist policies and social safety nets. Like I said, it wasn't true socialism. It was social democracy. And it was doing really good until U.S. embargoes and action by the CIA caused the country's economy to completely fucking crumble.
Will be authoritarian is because even if you have privatization, it's privatization in name only. The government has the ability, whether it uses it or not. The same as a fully functioning authoritarian system. A fully functioning, self-admittedly tyrannical system may not purge elements of the population, may choose to leave certain property alone. The fact that it is authoritarian, even in outward expression and self-admittedly, doesn't mean that it necessarily at all times abuses the population. What makes it authoritarian is its ability to do so. It's not...
Every government has the ability to do that. Every government, every state has a monopoly on violence. That's the purpose of a state. Every single government could be authoritarian in nature, and when it chooses not to be is when it's not authoritarian. So what you just said there, that if there's an authoritarian state that's not being authoritarian, it's still authoritarian. That could be said of any government, of any state on the planet. It's when the government chooses not to be authoritarian, that's when it's not authoritarian, bro.
Strain. So a government could fall into this form. So you have an authoritarian government, but it understands economics. So it says,
are you an anarchist? Do you not want any sort of government structure in place? Because, I mean, we could get on the same page there a little bit, I suppose. But I think that might be the closest we could come to an agreement with any of your philosophies.
like China. China's a great example. In the Chinese state, you have a hyper-privatized aspect of parts of the economy. Certain industries in China, they face virtually zero regulation.
That's because they're state-owned. China's a state capitalist economy. All of their major industry is owned by the state. But it's still capitalist. But yeah, it's an authoritarian regime. But that's certainly not leftist.
There's no set working hour restrictions, no environmental restrictions. There's no restrictions on wages. There's no restrictions on work. There's no workers' rights to speak of. Not that anyone in China has rights to begin with. It is extremely laissez-faire on paper. The problem is it's not actually laissez-faire. You're not owning the means of production. The people that manage those businesses in China are only allowed to do so long as they fall under the very authoritarian regimentation of ideology. If they step out of line, they lose their business because it's not theirs. The government
Exactly, state capitalism.
at all times has the full unilateral and dictatorial power to nationalize that business. In order for property, the means of production in the industrial sense, commercial sense, your farm, your home, you can grow things on your front lawn, which is why that wouldn't be personal property. When communists say, well, you can still have a house. No. It's not your house. It's the government's house. The government will also tell you what crops you're allowed to put in your little home garden, by the way.
Do you have any evidence for that? Do you have a source on that? And no, you can still own private property underneath personal property underneath socialism. You can still own a house. Socialism does not necessitate the decommodification of basic human needs. I advocate for that, but there are ways to do so without an authoritarian regime causing it to happen. It would necessitate a massive shift in the cultural zeitgeist, but it is possible without authoritarianism being necessary.
The government, though, has full control over it. So it's not private property. It's public property. It's collectively owned. It is communism. It's just communism that has a little bit more of an understanding of modern economics and how to structure itself in order to provide growth. But it doesn't mean that any of those people are at liberty to do what they want. They cannot say or believe the things that they want. They will be essentially handpicked by the government to run those businesses based on what properly would be a meritocratic function, but really it's a political function. It's rewards party insiders. We've seen this time.
Hang on. Did he just say that China's government is communism, but it's... What did he say? It's communism...
picked by the government to run those businesses based on what properly would be a meritocratic function, but really it's a political function. It's rewards party insiders. We've seen this time and time again. The government of China is far left. When people say, well, it's actually state capitalism, so it's far right. No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
The government controls it 100%. By the way,
yeah, state capitalism. So it still has a market. It still is traded public. They still have public trade. They still interact with capitalist nations, and they still have a capitalist economy. It's just controlled by the state. That's very, very far right-wing. It is not a left-wing system.
The government of China has a negative return on its own infrastructural projects that it's paying for by grifting off the top that supposedly private income, by going after the shaving off, by fleecing China. The fleecing of China will be the next series probably. When you think of fascism, they say, well, fascism is a far-right ideology. It was hyper-industrialized and hyper-capitalistic. Again, in name only. If you pissed Mussolini off, did you still run the factory? Or did Mussolini have you killed and replaced? Mussolini...
That's state capitalism. That's not left.
He had you killed and replaced. There's a reason for that. It's not private property. It's not a form of libertarian government. The idea that because you are at will to produce, to choose your job, to accumulate wealth means nothing if the government can come in at any time based on its own authoritarian leanings in the social sense, through its censorship and so forth, and wipe it back out. It's not yours. It's not your cash. It's the government's cash that it's letting you play around with as long as you toe the line. But the whole thing is you're towing the line because the government is authoritarian. And so it is economic leftism. It can't be considered fully privatized. The other aspect of capitalism is free trade. It's not just the ability to produce, it's also the
capitalism and laissez-faire capitalism are not inherently right-wing, though usually they more so are. Socialism and communism are what are generally considered left-wing. If these nations don't have that sort of system where the means of production are owned by the workers, or if it is a stateless, classless society, if those aren't the economic and social models that they use, they aren't left-wing. They're still authoritarian, sure, but it's authoritarian state capitalism. It's still owned by the state under a capitalist model. The state just happens to be the owner rather than an individual business owner. but it's still capitalism and it's still right-wing. Saying that it's not and using these left-wing labels to ascribe a left-wing aspect to it doesn't make it true. You just need it to be true so that you can justify the title of this video, but that doesn't make what you're saying accurate. You're just wrong.
The ability of the nation and the people in general to trade more or less freely. Does this exist in an authoritarian system of government? No, the government can tariff it out of existence instantaneously. It doesn't matter that it doesn't do that. China doesn't tariff everything, but it's still an authoritarian government, and it's extremely far left. And some people were...
No, it's not. It's not... I'm repeating myself. Jesus fuck.
Conflating what I was saying. What I am saying is that if it is an authoritarian government, it is far left. I'm not saying that left-leaning aspects of government are necessarily full-on authoritarian. There are left-leaning governments that are less so, because if it's more socially permissive, and if it is constrained, you can have a constitution on a fundamentally left-leaning nation. You can have a welfare state, sort of like you'd have like a Nordic model state. It leans left in some economic fashions, although it has actual capitalistic underpinnings.
Yeah, they're social democracies. They're not socialist, but the Nordic states are social democracies. They're left-leaning. They're not authoritarian. But China and Russia, and in some aspects the United States, are very authoritarian, and they're very right-wing. In Russia and China, especially China, instead of it being individual private citizens that are business owners, it's the state. But they still have capitalist systems and still have very right-wing policies that they run their country under, socially and economically. They aren't left-wing. They're very much right-wing. Jesus Christ, I can't talk. They aren't left-wing. They're very much right-wing. The Nordic states are left-leaning nations with social democracies, and they aren't authoritarian. You're disproving yourself right here.
Being said, it's not so authoritarian. What people can do with the wealth that they're actually allowed to have, and that, of course, to me is a more pure libertarian, is more problematic. That aspect is less authoritarian. You can't think of it as, well...
He's a libertarian. He just said he's libertarian. Holy shit. Holy shit, guys. So, I just released a video last week, week before, about why libertarians are dangerous. And in that video, I talked about how Nazis, white supremacists, white nationalists, basically right-wing chuds, far right-wing chuds, are infiltrating libertarianism for good PR. And they align themselves with libertarians because libertarians want to do away with government, or at least significantly reduce its influence. Libertarians want to do it because they believe that any sort of government is an infringement on human rights, which I disagree with, but that's not inherently dangerous. These people, like I was saying in that video, want to infiltrate the ranks of libertarians because they want to abolish or reduce the effectiveness of government for their own means, because they want to institute their own white nationalist ethno-state. Get rid of all the black people, get rid of all the brown people, get rid of all the Jews, triple brackets, or them with the triple brackets, that are running the government, according to the Nazis, so they can implement their Nazi state, their ethno-state. This right here, this is exactly what I was talking about. Holy shit. I didn't think I'd get proven right so quickly. Holy crap.
This is an authoritarian government or it's a libertarian government. No government is on either end. There's no such thing as a truly anarcho-capitalistic society, and there can't be because it would spontaneously generate higher levels of order. In fact, they would tend to be among the most authoritarian and corrupt.
How can you have an anarchist society that's authoritarian? Authoritarianism necessitates a state. In an anarchist society, there would be no state, so nobody would have a monopoly on violence to institute authoritarianism. You don't know. Sometimes I, too, use words I don't fully understand in an effort to sound more photosynthesis.
As soon as there was a single problem, that society would begin to collapse. There can't be a fully authoritarian society because there's always at least one empowered group that has liberty and latitude. It's just a matter of how much liberty is granted to what scope of the population. In a libertarian society, in the proper way, if you could approach a perfect libertarian society, here's the form it would take. It would be a society in which the government is seen as not much more than a night watchman state. It maintains courts to prevent internal victimization, and police attended to that, and it maintains a military to prevent external victimization. Other functions generally would fall under one of those two umbrellas. The idea of having a million pages of environmental legislation is much more legalistic, bureaucratic, and authoritarian than simply saying people have a right to drink water out of the river and expect that there's not toxic waste in it, and they can use the courts to sue a business that has violated the NAP in so doing. That's what the proper state be. Now, can we actually achieve this? No. It's utopian.
So having environmental regulations like preventing a river from being poisoned so that you can drink out of it would be government overreach in the eyes of most actual libertarians. And being able to sue companies for damaging the environment would be incompatible with actual libertarians. This is what I'm talking about, guys. He doesn't want to get rid of big government because he thinks government infringes on rights. He wants to get rid of government because it's infringing on the rights of people he likes. I'm pretty sure he means white people. This guy's not actually a libertarian, just based on what he just said.
Like all forms of government, there's a utopian, idealistic version, and then there's the one you actually end up getting. The closest thing you can have to a properly understood anarcho-capitalist or even monarchist society is a fairly hardline classical liberalism with an expanded constitution. A state that is 99% privatized. But the government will need the power to step in at times, simply for pragmatic reasons, to prevent the society from collapsing, to prevent it from, through its disorganization, upending, and being replaced with one that's more authoritarian. Inevitably, by the way. Including if you end up with an ANCAP society, we saw this. There was a time, for a very short period, when anarchists controlled part of Spain. What happened? They ended up getting wiped out by Franco and by a bunch of communists that kept squabbling with them. For a while, the communists and anarchists got along together, because they sort of had similar goals, because they had a common enemy. Eventually, when the food started running short, the communists decided to start cannibalizing people, because then that's what severe authoritarians tend to do. The anarchists weren't very pleased with that at the time. But authoritarian systems can't be considered capitalistic.
I'm not super familiar with what he's talking about here, so I'm not going to comment on it, because I don't want to be wrong, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there so I didn't get copyrighted by this guy for letting him go on too long.
You can't have privatization in an authoritarian system. The government will have the authority to take away that supposed private property. It's not yours, it's not private. I would argue that this is also violated. I would argue that
the government would be, or not the government, but society would reappropriate private property, the means of production, and have it given to the workers. That says nothing about personal property, your own personal shit, your own computer, your own car, like you said earlier. The government, society, would not be able to come in and just take that. Unless it was authoritarian, sure. But socialism and communism don't necessitate authoritarianism. But you're talking out your ass here.
In any state in the United States, which has a semi-liberal model, it's part authoritarian, there are libertarian underpinnings, you do have a constitution, sometimes it works, sometimes, unfortunately, it doesn't protect us for long periods of time.
See, he even admits that America is authoritarian, and the current America that we live in is definitely not a leftist society by any means. Sure, gay people can get married, and trans people aren't killed in the streets, yet, although if the current administration keeps going, it might end up there. But America itself is certainly not a leftist society. It is authoritarian, though.
Cruikshank decision, which thankfully was overturned. In a state where you have a property tax, you don't have capitalism. You don't own your home, you're renting it from the government. There are states with no property tax.
I'm sorry. Is he saying that America's not capitalist because we pay property taxes? Holy shit, dude.
By the way, it should be nationwide. There shouldn't be a property tax anyway. It should be deemed unconstitutional. Kind of violates equal protection when you think about it. One person can't really own property, the other person can. I would say that at least under homesteading, the idea of a homestead, a certain amount of land and your first home up to a certain value should be constitutionally guaranteed exempt from property taxes. Just my opinion as maybe a pragmatic libertarian. I'm not saying Bill Gates should be able to buy up an entire city and never pay any taxes on his holdings. Of course, that would be very libertarian in name, but it's utopian nonsense. It's not.
So at what size or at what value would they suddenly start paying property taxes? Because if that was the case and the government said any home under $100,000 is not subject to property taxes, suddenly there wouldn't be any houses in this nation underneath $100,000. I know in my current particular state, finding a home under $100,000 is fucking impossible, but there are certain states that is possible to do so. However, if it got to a point where the government said that there were no property taxes underneath $100 of value for a house or a property or whatever, it would take a minute, but after over the course of time, eventually there would be no houses that were valued at less than $100,000. If this sort of thing was implemented 100 years ago, when a house being $100,000 was an inordinate amount of money, regardless of the house that you were purchasing, unless you were ultra wealthy, and even then that was still a fuck ton of money. Or even 200 years ago, let's go there. Just as a more extreme example, a house costing $100,000, especially for the average citizen, was unheard of. So if they implemented a house, any property or housing that costs less than $100,000 is exempt from property taxes. If we follow inflation up to today and they don't change the legislation, almost every single fucking house in America would still be subject to property tax. So you would have to find a threshold. You would have to find a threshold at which it is appropriate to not have property taxes. Then you would need to somehow prevent the market through state control from prevent the market from allowing houses to cost more than that on average and making that $100,000 threshold essentially useless. And then you would also have to find a different way to fund our schools. I support that, finding a different way other than property taxes to fund our schools. But to prevent a house from having to pay property taxes under a certain value would necessitate the state preventing houses from being worth more than that on average and making that be an outlier of value on houses. Sounds pretty authoritarian, buddy. Not very libertarian, if you ask me.
Pragmatic can't work and would result in anarchy. It would result in a revolution. The communists would try to take over. So when communists say, well, I'm a libertarian communist or libertarian socialist, no, you're not. Explicitly, you're not. You're saying the government has the right to rob an indefinite proportion of the production, usually through the regulatory system, the right to confiscate it, that you have a right to others' productivity, and in some cases, they argue to their property. That can't be seen as anything other than authoritarian.
See, this clearly shows he has no idea what socialism is. Socialism isn't just when the government does stuff, bro. The government wouldn't own the means of production. The worker would. The government wouldn't come and seize your means of production away from you. You would get more of it underneath a proper socialist system. You don't know what these words mean, dude, and yet you're making 15-minute videos about them. Please learn what socialism actually means before you try to shit on it. Because if you don't, you just end up sounding dumb. Bro, you sound stupid.
And it doesn't matter the form of government. There's another thing. Some people, and this isn't a mistake that leftists tend to make. This is actually a mistake liberals tend to make. People who are in the main line of society. They think that, like, if you had a dictatorship, that's authoritarian, and if you have a democracy, that's very pro-freedom. Not necessarily. The democracy, you could have 51% of the population vote to kill the other 49% properly. You could also have a dictator who technically has total power but doesn't use it and just sits there. Doesn't do anything. Says, fuck, you can do whatever you want. Now, I'm not.
Are you arguing that dictators promote freedom? Holy shit. Yeah, you could have a dictator that gets to his seat of power and then just doesn't exercise his power. Sure. That could happen. It doesn't, though. That's not human nature. Dictators don't just get to their seat of power and then do nothing. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to be a dictator. Holy shit, he's actually defending the concept of a dictatorship. And shitting on the idea of a liberal democracy. Holy fuck.
I'm not even going to tax you. You can fucking send me some fruit from your garden and I'll be eating high on the hog. A dictator could do that. You could have an authoritarian democracy. In fact, you've had many of them throughout time. They tend to become authoritarian over time.
An authoritarian democracy. Wait, did he say authoritarian democracy or dictatorial democracy?
I'll be eating high on the hog. A dictator could do that. You could have an authoritarian democracy. In fact, you've had many of them throughout time. They tend to become authoritarian over time. You can have a very lazy...
Okay, yes, I misheard him. Yes, you can have an authoritarian democracy like we do in America, but you can't have a dictatorial democracy, that's for sure.
A fair dictatorship. You don't tend to. Usually the dictator gets power mad and paranoid because that's the human tendency is to be corrupted by wealth and power and prestige. It's unfortunate.
You see, he just admits it right here. They don't do that because that's not human nature. A dictator doesn't seize power and then do nothing. Look at North Korea, bro.
Fortunate, that's why it's better to have a government that's like a Republican system that changes over time. People get booted back out. We should have term limits for Congress for this reason. But yeah, there's just some...
I mean, I agree with that. I agree with term limits for Congress. So I guess we agree on two things in the course of this video. Why am I agreeing with him?
Thoughts here on authoritarianism.
Stop making me agree with you.
Fascism is not a right-wing ideology, and yes, the Nazis were...
Yes, it is. It's in the definition. It is in the definition.
Socialists, absolutely.
Fuck. Holy shit. Oh my god. The Nazis weren't socialist. Just because it was in the name. The Nazi Party, the Nationalist Socialist Party, was as much socialist as the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea is a democracy. Just because it's in the name doesn't mean that's what it is. Holy shit. They were very much an authoritarian, fascist regime that used state capitalism. They were not socialist. Socialism isn't when the government does shit. Holy fuck.
Absolutely. They were socialist in more than just name. When a government has the...
In fact, when the Nazis took power, the socialists, the Strasserites, were the first people that Hitler killed. Before the Jews. They were the first group of people that he eradicated from that country, were the socialists. And then he went on to kill 6.5 million Jews and gay people and black and brown people and gypsies and... Or actually, I don't know if I can say that anymore. Is that a slur? Shit. Another accidental racism. Maybe. Fuck. But anyway, those were the demographics he went after. But the first people he took out were the socialists.
Unilateral authority. You think about this. They say, well, the Nazis were very capitalistic and right-leaning. Oh, really? Well, I seem to recall them attacking, burning, and nationalizing thousands of storefronts because a certain ethnicity of people happened to own them.
Yes. They did nationalize these corporations, but they didn't redistribute the means of production to the people. It became a state capitalist society.
Very, very private property that was when it was getting attacked by people who were rioting at the time, and they were on by the brown shirts, of course. That's not a right-wing ideology. That's one that leans to the left. Again, there's a...
No, it's not. No, it's not. It doesn't make it true just because you say it, bro.
Gradient of authoritarianism. The authoritarian government can say, well, we've got privatization, we've got a market economy, but it's only for people that the government allows to partake in it. That's authoritarian. It's also left-leaning, because it's not your property. It's only your property in name. It'd be like if the government said, well, yeah, everyone has the right to have a free computer, but if you say the wrong things, we're shutting off your internet, taking it back. No, it wouldn't. It's authoritarian, dude. It's not. It wouldn't be a libertarian move. Oh, well, everyone gets the right to communicate on these platforms as long as you say what the government tells you you're allowed to say. That's about all.
So I think he's trying to throw in at the end of this that companies and corporations removing speech from their platforms that they deem inappropriate as some sort of government censorship. Which is not true. I did a video, PragerU versus YouTube, previously talking about this. However, that's what they could do in a state capitalist society. If the state owns the internet company or the internet provider, and you speak out against the government, they could turn off your internet. But if the workers, the proletariat, own the means of production, and the workers owned the internet provider, the government couldn't do that because it wouldn't be nationalized. It wouldn't be owned by the state. That, my friends, would be socialism.